it will impact Colorado for sure, as Colorado, under the Polish regime, is trying to go to wind, solar, and batteries exclusively. And we know that's the most expensive way to power the grid. We also know it's the least reliable way to power the grid, per the Colorado Energy Office. Will this raise prices in Colorado, which the current trajectory we're on with wind, solar, and batteries will bankrupt the state anyway? Will this add to it? Yeah, because you won't have taxpayers in Missouri or Arizona paying part of your electricity bill. Colorado will have to own all of its bad policies.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another episode of PowerGab, your go-to show for all things energy and environmental policy in the state of Colorado. I'm Jake Fogleman, joined as always by my co-host Amy Cooke. And to kick things off for us this week, we do want to just do a little bit of a quick federal update, because literally just hours before we're recording this, the U.S. House passed its version of the so-called, Big Beautiful Bill. And there is a significant energy piece to that. We're just getting reporting from Utility Dive about some of the energy implications. We'll drop that in the show notes so you folks can read along as well. But there appears to be, at least in the House version of this legislation, a significant rollback of a lot of the so-called tax credits or incentives that passed in the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yeah, and Jake, this happened late last night. The beauty of being in the Mountain Time Zone is that we found out about it while some of our friends and colleagues on the East Coast were fast asleep. Although, true political junkies were up waiting to see how the vote went, and it was close. It was 215 to 214, so yep. It was super close. But what they did is they rolled back. And this came out of the House Rules Committee and then went to the floor. So you had markup in a whole bunch of different committees. Ultimately, the last one, I think it came out of the House Rules Committee, which is chaired by a friend, and she is an absolute force of nature, Virginia Fox out of North Carolina. You don't mess with her. She has her way of doing things, and she's going to get stuff through, and that's what she did. And my guess is she delivered for the president what he wanted, and there were rollbacks on the Inflation Reduction Act incentives. Now, this is, and it's primarily for wind and solar. So, and I'll just give everybody this headline, because this, and then you'll understand what we mean when we get just into a couple of the specifics. Utility Dives, this is the headline: House GOP budget worse than feared for clean energy. And that's what analysts are saying. They're saying the bill is unworkable. Well, it depends on who you're talking to. But it raises the barrier for wind and solar projects to qualify for these tax credits. So what it does is, for those who don't know, wind and solar tax credits have been around a very, very long time. And energy bad boys, Isaac and Mitch, who have been on the show, Isaac Orr and Mitch Rolling, who've both been on the show before, they actually did a timeline of the quote phase outs, that have never happened, that started in 1992. And remember, it was because they were baby technologies. They were new technologies. They weren't yet ready for prime time, or they needed just a little bit of help. And I think those were Michael Bennett's words. Just need a little bit of help. Well, here, 1992, fast forward to today, we are now in 2025, and apparently the wind and solar lobby is still saying they need these tax credits to continue, but they're not going to. Go ahead.
So just to jump in there, just to kind of frame this for people, there are literally members of Congress that are younger than the wind production tax credit. That's just how long this has been around. I think like Maxwell Frost, he's a young, Gen Z rep from Florida, and there are literal members of Congress younger than the production tax credit for wind. So to your point.
So they've been around a long time. These are not new technologies that just need a little bit of help to get started. So what they've done is they're accelerating the phase out. It would begin in 2028. And that means it would begin during President Trump's term in office. And that's a big deal. So he elected in 2024, inaugurated in 2025, January 2025. These begin phase out in 2028 towards at the end of his term. So that's actually huge because you won't have a situation of a change of administration that could flip that, assuming this gets through the Senate. So the phase out begins in 2028. The other thing about this is these have to be projects, so they will have already had to have been permitted at this point. And then construction must begin within 60 days of the signing of the bill. So that's pretty quick. And then the other part of that, it must be in service by 2028. So you have to get your transmission lines, you have to get everything. These are, remember what Obama said, shovel-ready jobs, shovel-ready projects? Or shovel-ready projects that were going to, it was, the Recovery Act. These literally have to be shovel-ready right now. Your supply chain is in order. You have everything there. You can break ground, and that project must be in service by 2028 to get the tax credit. So they are absolutely right. The wind and solar lobby are 100% correct. They did raise the barrier to let's say they raised the standards to get to qualify for those credits. The other thing about it, Jake, these are not transferable. So, you sell and then, you sell the credits and they're saying, oh, it's going to make financing so much harder. And I'm just like, wait a second. You told me the market loves these. Remember, the market is changing. The market wants wind and solar. Well, if they want wind and solar, then you'll have no problem selling the project, whether there are credits or not. The other thing that just makes me crazy, and you and I have talked about this, they've said, in fact, we were having an exchange on LinkedIn and on Twitter on both of these. When solar is cheap and abundant and ready right now. Well, if it's a cheap and abundant and ready right now, why does it need a subsidy?
Yep.
So this, and I should say it applies to wind and solar. It does not apply to nuclear. Mostly because nuclear has been the subject of, I'd call it regulatory oppression for a very long time. So I think, and you and I talked about this as well. Chris Wright was likely responsible for much of that, wanting to keep. He's not a fan of subsidies. He said, but if you're going to do it, the one that needs it at this point might be nuclear for a few years because it has been subjected to such regulatory oppression, getting out from underneath it, from all of that. Meanwhile, while they streamline permitting and get rid of some of actually they're going to have to turn over the NRC as well, get some new commissioners in there. So it might need a little bit more time. So this is what came out of the House. It goes to the Senate. We'll see what happens there. But it is a big deal. It will impact Colorado for sure, as Colorado, under the Polish regime, is trying to go to wind, solar, and batteries exclusively. And we know that's the most expensive way to power the grid. We also know it's the least reliable way to power the grid per the Colorado Energy Office. Will this raise prices in Colorado, which the current trajectory we're on with wind, solar, and batteries will bankrupt the state anyway? Will this add to it? Yeah, because you won't have taxpayers in Missouri or Arizona paying part of your electricity bill. Colorado will have to own all of its bad policies.
Yeah, which is, I think, just right. You should internalize the costs that you create. And kind of to your point, it's basically put up or shut up time for the wind and solar folks that have said that it's a market-driven point now, and they're mature technologies. well, I guess we'll see, right? Assuming, like you said, the caveat remains that the Senate still has to have its way with the bill, and we'll see what comes from that. But to your point about affordability in Colorado and what the subsidy repeal might do to that, sure, it could impact affordability, but there's a bigger story on that that I think at least folks at the PUC are starting to pay attention to. I'm not sure the broader political class is just yet. And that is, of course, another utility dive story and a recent meeting at the Public Utilities Commission that we wanted to cover. And that is just the sheer size of the capital expenditures that Xcel is proposing to meet, buzzword of the year, load growth. Everyone's talking about the coming load growth, whether it's from policy like, beneficial electrification, or as we've called it, detrimental electrification, EVs, heat pumps, or data centers, which are the hot topic. But Utility Dive has an interesting article about whether or not that data center load really is going to be as large as some people are fearing. And that's clearly on the minds of the public utilities commissioners as they're trying to understand what this is going to do to the bills that Xcel ratepayers ultimately have to pay.
Jake, you and I have talked about this as well. I don't want to say that we're soothsayers or prophets or anything, but I want to say it didn't take a rocket scientist or a genius to figure out, especially knowing what we know about what's going on in all of the states, because we network with our fellow state policy network folks who are in states, and I think we have 41 different groups that we have which are part of our coalition that we talk to on a regular basis. And if every single state is claiming it is going to have double the load growth, it seems to me that somebody's not shooting straight,
Yeah.
right? Like, and this is why when I was at an energy summit in DC back, I think it was February, I asked a data center developer about it. And I said, and I asked him specifically about Colorado. I said, "Do you hear anything about Colorado? Like putting a data center in Colorado?" He goes, he's thought for a minute because he'd been talking about states all over the country, just never mentioned Colorado. And I said, I asked him, I said, "You hear anything about Colorado?" And he goes, yeah, no, don't really hear anything about anybody wanting to talking about building data centers there. And that's because they're going to places where they can get power immediately, they can get power reliably, and they can get power cheaply. And none of that really, Colorado doesn't have those characteristics when it comes to its grid, especially when you look at projected costs going forward. So what the utility dive story was saying, essentially they call it the phantom load. I mean, I thought it was a great term, and it's about the fact that these data centers are essentially playing states against each other, like which
Yep.
one is going to give me the best deal on power and speed to power. And one of the things that was quoted in there is, I think, and I don't have the story in front of me right now, but I think it was, there are 5 times more requests for data center for connections than there actually are being built. So think about that. 5 times more. It may even be higher than that, but I think it was 5 times more. And so what you realize is all of these states are looking to build out because they have all of these, possibly these data centers that are going to come and they're going to build in their states, and they're going to, jobs are going to be created. Who gets left paying for that? If they build out the growth like what Xcel wants to do in Colorado, want to build it out because they anticipate demand. And by the way, can we just acknowledge that utilities aren't great at forecasting?
Yeah, that's a key point.
So they're projecting this double the load growth, and we're supposed to pay for it. But what happens if that demand doesn't materialize?
Yeah, that is I guess I should say multi-billion dollar question, because that's truly what's at stake here. And to your point, I have the quote up here: 5 to 10 times more requests for data centers. This is a Google senior analyst who does this sort of stuff, saying that they're thinking 5 to 10 times more requests. And what we have going on here is what you just hinted at, is sort of the competing financial incentives. You have the data centers on the one hand wanting to play states off of each other to see who gives them the best deal. And then you have the utilities, especially the investor-owned ones, who have their own financial incentive to run to their public utilities commissions and say, we're getting all these requests. We have 20 gigawatts worth of data centers that want to hook. You need to authorize us to build. Oh, and by the way, guess what? When we build, that's how we make profits. That's the business model. So you can see how this might create a little bit of a perverse incentive. And if that phantom load truly does, that phenomenon, comes to Colorado, it could be a potential disaster for the ratepayers of this state. Speaking of the Public Utilities Commission, the commissioners had a weekly meeting about this. We're going to try to drop some slides in the show notes and potentially get them to appear on the screen in post. But what they essentially looked at is looking at different Excel forecasts that they've presented to the commission in recent months, and what it would look like if all the load they say is going to come does show up, in which case it looks like rates increase about the rate of inflation, maybe slightly higher. What it looks like if they're off by a little bit, and what it looks like if they're way off and none of that load shows up, and yet they still invest all this money. And that worst case scenario is exceptionally painful for the ratepayers of Colorado. You're talking about a tripling in residential electricity rates, potentially.
Yeah, in a short period of time.
Yeah.
And so this is where Eric Blank, who is commissioner of the Public Utilities Commission, where he said, and actually, because if you go online and you can actually watch these, and we'll put the link, if you really want to watch it, you can watch it. But we'll put, and it's transcribed at the bottom, so it's closed caption. There are captions for it. And what he says is, and this gets to the heart of the matter. And what they're talking about is, what if the demand isn't there? What if ratepayers are on the hook for this build out and the demand doesn't materialize? You're looking at residential electric rates at 45 cents per kilowatt hour. Right now we're at about 15, which right now seems high. And if you're on time of use charges, we have to do a whole show on time of use charges. Don't worry, we'll get to it. But on your time of use charge is, I think, 20 cents in the summer right now. It'll go higher than that for sure. But if this load doesn't materialize, ratepayers are on the hook for that. And residential, imagine your monthly electric bill being 3 times what it is now. And what did we say? This was back before the data center, boom, bonanza was all the rage. The paper that the Independence Institute commissioned that you wrote, and Isaac and Mitch modeled, but that you wrote, we know what happens to those residential bills.
Yep.
In what you're having now, what you're seeing now is the Public Utilities Commission essentially saying, yeah, but my guess is, because they're using probably Excel's numbers, I think they're being conservative. I think it'll be higher than 45 cents a kilowatt hour.
Yeah, you're probably right. And just to rattle off a few stats that Eric Blank dropped in this meeting that kind of underscore why this is such a risk. It's obviously, like I mentioned, the capital expenditures, Excel building things, is what drives the profit and the increased rates. And Eric Blank rattled off sort of a 10-year growth in sort of the base rates for Excel. And he says in 2021, Excel's rate base was about $8 billion. By 2028, it's projected to be $30 billion. And then by 2032, it's projected to be over $40 billion as it invests to build out transmission lines, the Fenberg Rider, the Clean Energy Plan, and now building new generation to facilitate data centers that may or may not show up. And that is just a staggering, what is that, a 5 times increase in rate base in a decade's time. And what really worried me is seeing a lot of these charts that the commission put up where Excel is being compared to PG&E. Now, I don't know about you, Amy, but when I see Colorado compared to California utilities and California utility spending and utility rates, boy, do my hackles start to get up, because that is the poster child of expensive electricity, unreliable electricity, and utility commission mismanagement. And the fact that we're being mentioned in the same conversation really worries me.
Well, and it should, because not only are we mentioned in the same conversation, we're going to be worse. When you look at some of these graphs, we are going to be worse. We are going to be in a worse position. And this is what we have been talking about, and this is why we have this show. And this is why we talk about where Colorado is headed on its electricity future. Because, and listen, I wish we didn't see the things we see. I wish it were different, but it's not. And it isn't just us saying it. You now have the Public Utilities Commission looking at this going, this gets to the heart of the matter. This cost is not, it's not sustainable. We can't do this.
Right.
And if you read between the lines, I think Eric Blank is raising a red flag.
Yeah, I think you're right. And the other thing to mention is that not only does this chase of this capital spending to meet this load growth that may or may not show up, obviously some of it will, just because there's policy mandates in Colorado that say you have to electrify, you have to get EVs, et cetera, or there's incentives. But not only does that capital chasing raise risks for rates, but it also, as we've seen, seems like it's atrophying Xcel's existing service and existing reliability, because part of what they covered at this meeting before they got into this slide deck of future rates is the fact that Xcel's operating and maintenance spending has been on a yearly decline, and it's currently at like the very bottom tier of utilities that are spending on their O&M stuff. So basically maintaining the equipment that exists as is. And as a result, 2024 was one of the worst years that they've had in decades in terms of customer outages. So when you set up a system to incentivize the utility to chase new spending and forget about making sure the existing stuff works as planned, it's a double disaster because you get more expensive service and worse quality.
That's exactly right. And if you wonder why there are blackouts, besides just reliability issues of the generation mix of what we're talking about in the future, but if your equipment is old and you're not keeping up with maintenance, which clearly, according to the Public Utilities Commission, Xcel is not keeping up with operations and maintenance. And in fact, they were bragging about how lean they are on their maintenance. And and Eric Blank, he puts up how much other utilities spend on operations and maintenance. Xcel, not only is it cutting back, like spending less. So think about it. They can't keep up. They're not even just keeping up with inflation. They're actually cutting it.
Yeah.
They're actually reducing the amount they're spending on operations and maintenance as they chase the expansion of their rate base, which, as I know, having spent a week in rate case boot camp, that is how utilities their revenue requirements that they get through a rate case come from their rate base, and then they get a certain percentage on top of that. And Xcel Energy, which is Colorado's largest utility, it's a monopoly utility, they have been champions of this electrification, of fuel switching, of allowing, not just incentivizing them to chase wind and solar tax credits. Well, now we're facing the perfect storm. They aren't spending on operations and maintenance. Their rate base, from 8 billion to 30 billion?
Yep,
Something
in 3 years. Yeah.
So, what is that? 3.5 times roughly. I mean, that's, it's absurd. Like if you had said that I'm curious, in legislative testimony, would anybody have voted for that?
Right.
Because that ratepayers pay for that. So they're decreasing operations and maintenance, increasing their rate base at the same time that those federal tax credits are going to go away.
Yep.
So Colorado will own all of its bad policies. And if everybody wants to know where to look, you can look at the Gold Dome and the Governor's Mansion. Those are the two places that are responsible for the predicament that Colorado finds itself in. Talk to your legislators.
Yep. That's where it all originates. As we're coming up on time here, I'll leave folks with just one quote from, what this this bragging lean O&M spending has resulted. The PUC says the average customer experienced more than double the total amount of outage time compared to what historical trend would predict. So you're already seeing double the number of blackouts for customers because of that super lean and efficient O&M budget. Meanwhile, we're staring down the barrel of PG&E level rates. So fun times ahead for Colorado ratepayers. But do you have any takeaways for our listeners here, Amy?
Yeah, yes. Okay. You are seeing the Californication on steroids of our grid. So we're Californiizing our grid, only we have colder weather. So more people die in cold than they do in heat. It's going to be a problem. That's number one. Number two is the people who are responsible for this. You can yell at Excel, but Excel is doing exactly what Excel does, which is it's like expecting a rattlesnake not to bite you. Excel is making a profit in the way it knows how because its fiduciary responsibility is to its shareholders, and that's what it's doing. The people who are responsible are at the state capitol, they're under the gold dome, and they're in the governor's mansion. Talk to your legislators. When we have a governor's race, when we do coming up, ask them where they stand on this. Make them take a stance on it. Ask your legislators. I'd even ask my county commissioners. I'd be asking everybody about it because you know what? We're the ones who are stuck with this bill. And then three, firm your own grid because lawmakers and the governor aren't doing it for you. So get a generator.
Get a generator. You heard her, folks. But that does it for us on another episode of PowerGab. If you like what you saw here, you can head over to powergab.org to check out our entire back catalog. We produce new episodes every single week. We're also available wherever you get your audio shows, whether that's Spotify or Apple. And if you want to reach out to us to suggest future show topics or guests you'd like to see us interview, you can send those our way at info@powergab.org. We always love hearing from you guys. But until next week, we'll see you.